Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Martinson of Peak Prosperity, and we're here with another Featured Voices podcast. This is a really important one today. As you know, a lot of what I do has been, up to this point in time, has been about problem definition. And I'm not going to go there because I think everybody who's watching this is already familiar with what the problems and predicaments are, right? We've got global climate change and melting ice and running out of soil that's being turned into dirt, and we've got oil issues looming in the future. We've got a runaway money system, all this stuff. It feels out of control. That's the problem definition. But the solution space, what does that look like? We know that we're already in the fourth turning. We know that already institutional faith and trust in institutions is eroding. And we know that we're in a period of great upheaval and change with a fractured population. So none of those are really great inputs to really begin to shift things at this point in time. So my view is that we're going to go through some more hardness, hard times, darkness, things like that before we get to the turnaround. But it's not too early to begin thinking about what that turnaround looks like. If you've been following me, you know, in my own small corner of the world, I'm creating a little oasis, a literal oasis where in my own small way, converting soil, dirt back into soil, and working with my local community and building up the infrastructure I need so that I can be really additive to my community. So that's one thing that you could do. It's one thing I'm doing. So lots of people are searching for these kinds of solutions. With us today to talk about this in the solution space and what comes next, what comes after the crumbling. You know, there's going to be a rebirth, a reemergence. So it's not too early to be thinking about, well, what does that look like? And I think if we're fair, we say a lot of the systems that we've put in place aren't working for us. We're working for them. We are in service to money, not the other way around. It's bizarre, right? Don't even get me started on how badly our health institutions behaved during this whole COVID crisis, things like that. So the question becomes, if not that, then what? And that's what today's conversation is about with Charles Hugh Smith, prolific author, good friend of both myself and Adam, and a longtime Peak Prosperity contributor, and all-around great guy. His blog is Of Two Minds, and he's just a fantastic thinker and articulator. And guess what? He's written a book about this very subject, so that's why we're bringing him on today to talk about that. Charles, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Chris, for that. And what a brilliant introduction to the ideas behind the book, which is we're going to need a new system. Now, it doesn't have to replace the existing system entirely. It just has to be an alternative that people could choose if they so desire to. But I think what the idea behind the book is to take your oasis and other people's oases, right? Like decentralized, anti-fragile, but connected, right? With other like-minded people, and create a system that actually makes it easy to do this. And right now you're having to start from scratch, basically reinvent the wheel, right? And then you're fighting a kludgy, broken, unfair, rigged system every step of the way to create a decentralized, like community-based economy. So my idea was, well, what would a system be like if we designed it from scratch to actually make it easy to join a community economy? And so the book's title is A Hacker's Teleology. And you go, well, that's interesting, but what does it mean? And so it means that a hack is like a life hack. It's not like a bad thing. There are hackers who try to break in and control systems and so on. But originally the word hack meant a workaround. You got a kludgy system that's not working and you don't have the time, money, energy, to create a whole new system from scratch. You're going to have to find a workaround. So that's why I say it's a hacker's teleology. What's a teleology? Well, a teleology is like the destination we're going to reach if you connect certain dots. So what are the dots we want to connect? Well, we want a system that's opt-in and voluntary, not like the one we have now. We want it to be fair, not like the one we have now. We want it to have its own money supply that comes from the bottom. Money's created at the bottom of the economy, not at the top. And we also want it to be human. In other words, like that it recognizes the value of dignity, contributions, meaning, purposeful work, and the needs of the community, things like that. Well, if you connect those dots, you end up with the system that I've proposed. That's the teleology part of it. Then the subtitle is sharing the wealth of our shrinking planet, because we all know it's a finite world we're on, and the resources are being depleted. And so we're going to have to make some sort of concerted effort to share this somewhat equally, at least not as unequally as it is now. And so to me, the obvious solution is take your oasis, multiply it by 100,000 oases around the world that's connected to a global community economy. And that's much more likely to be sharing the wealth, because we're all sharing the same value system, which is degrowth, becoming more efficient, becoming more localized, not wasting resources, and not chasing profits as the only incentive in the system.
So a hacker's teleology, I like that. Thanks for explaining that, because that definitely helped me understand what it is. And so let me pick up one piece of that, the fairness piece. I think that one of the most obvious things about being a primate, to be biological about this, is all social creatures actually are wired for fairness in some way, shape, or form. And if we're in a deeply unfair system, people's, any organism's attachment to that system begins to wane, right? A deeply unfair system is not a really fun one. I think if you took any 6-year-old and you just completely rigged the game of Monopoly, so they lost by the 8th turn of dice, they would stop playing very quickly, right? And so that idea, though, that we have deeply unfair institutions, my question to you is that just an automatic place where humans end up? And if so, is there actually a system you could design where it just doesn't end up there again?
Right. I think that's a key question, because history seems to suggest that it always ends up in a hierarchy with, entitled, privileged folks at the top skimming the wealth of the system. But I think technology gives us a little bit of leverage here, because it's now introduced us to systems that we could design. In my terminology, you take a value system and you create processes that lead to those values being the goal. And in the past, that process could always be convoluted, or it could be corrupted by people, right? Like that's our political system. It was designed, in an idealistic fashion, but it's easily corrupted because everybody in the system can be bought. So, but if you're dealing with a software system that's open source, that everybody can see how it's programmed, but it doesn't allow you to do anything but do what the system's designed to do, then you really you've limited the opportunities for human corruption. And people say, well, that sounds like a dream. Is that possible? And I think about systems like that we use all the time, like large systems. If they don't have to have any bias, like if you want to be an eBay buyer or seller, you join and then that's it. I don't think the system is rigged to one ethnicity or one religion or anything like that. If you follow the rules and you get good ratings, then there you go. And so if we took a system and we said, we're only collecting this data, your name, your ID number in this system, and the reputational reviews of your peers, that's all we're going to collect. Well, then where could there be any bias? We don't have any information on which to base the bias. And if no one is in charge, if it's a self-organizing system, then there's nobody at the top to corrupt. And so I think it's pretty obvious to me that the way you get a fair system is you don't make it a hierarchy. You make it a flat system that's self-organizing, like nature, like an ecosystem, right? And so if you've stripped the system of opportunities for corruption and bias, well, then you're not going to have any. And of course, there will be people that try to game the system and so on. And so you have to kind of watch out for that. But if the system's designed without any gigantic holes and it only collects this minimal data, then there really isn't much opportunity for bias. And so I think AI could be applied to developing a completely unbiased system instead of maximizing profit. But I know that's my voice is lonely at this point in time, but I think that idea that AI could actually serve us instead of us serving it could catch on.
Well, let's be clear. AI has been principally directed and used at this point to make money, right? So Twitter uses a very advanced AI system to determine what I like to see, what I don't like to see, what's going to ultimately lead to the most engagement. And it's just parsing through my every mouse hover and scrolling speed and all these other parameters to sort of figure out where am I slowing down, what am I looking at, and then feeding me stuff with the idea that I'll click on something that makes somebody some money, right? So that's all in service of money. You're saying we could use AI potentially in service of humanity, because let me be clear about something. Every money system enforces some behaviors, punishes others, right? It's an incentive system. And so a debt-based money system has some really powerful incentives baked into it. I think from my perspective, I cast judgment on it. I say might have been a great idea in 1913, probably made sense up through the 40s, but it's been making less and less sense ever since. And now we're in the part of the story where you have to literally be insane to try and make sense of what the Federal Reserve is up to and the rationalizations for it, right? So we've gone crazy over the tips of our skis in our attempts to perpetuate and maintain a system that's pretty much outlived its usefulness. You say there's another system we could bring in on this, and AI could actually be part of that.
Right. For instance, my basic idea, which I've often posted in my essays on peak prosperity, is if you don't change the way money's created and distributed, you've changed nothing. Right? You can talk about reforms and, we're going to do this and noble sounding stuff. If you don't change the way money's created and distributed, you change nothing, because people at the top have all the money and they can buy whatever they want. Jeffrey Epstein, a perfect example, right? You want to get into Harvard, the top echelon? Just donate $10 million. And then pretty soon you're the greatest buddy of everybody in Harvard. So that's the way the system's rigged now. So my thing is we got to start a new system of money, and cryptocurrencies give us that option. For the first time, we can actually say we're going to create digital money like the Fed does out of thin air, but we're going to create it in only one circumstance: to pay for labor that was considered valued by the community. Mm-hmm. And so if you did some useful work, like say on you're creating a network around your homestead, if somebody in that network you're creating did some work that was beneficial, then they would get paid, and the system would monitor their activity. It would verify that they actually did the work, so that they couldn't cheat and say they did it, but there's no verification. All this is pretty straightforward stuff. And then the money would be created, and it would be limited because human labor is actually limited. The Fed has no limit, but human labor, there's only so much of it, even on a planetary scale. So the amount of money that we're creating is going to always be limited. Meanwhile, it's producing goods and services. So therefore, there's something in the system to buy. So there'll be some use for the money. So that's kind of my scheme. And I consider it obvious, which is, of course, dangerous, because what's obvious to me is not obvious to anybody else. And so one of the things I tried to do in my book is explain my own life history. Like I've been working for 50 years, and I've had a lot of different jobs, like a lot of other people. And so as I've encountered injustice and unfairness and bias and the rigged nature of the system, those experiences helped me realize, well, we got to start with these fundamentals, right? Yeah. So the fundamental is we need a new kind of money that's created at the bottom of the pyramid, not at the top.
Well, as I said, every money system enforces some behaviors, punishes others. I feel like farmers get punished in our system the way it's currently configured, right? And having spent more time around farmers now, because I'm trying to do some farming stuff, they are the most unbelievably gifted, hardworking people I know. They are their own animal husbandry experts. They are their own crop specialists. They understand nutrient cycling. They can weld. They know how to build a house. They know how to fix stuff. On and on and on. They have to market everything. Like if you wanted to say, like basically they are everything, soup to nuts, from production to sales, and so it's a pretty comprehensive sort of a thing, and it's very hard work. And by the way, they're some of the least well compensated people I know. So our money system basically punishes that, right? and keep squeezing towards an outcome which says all these smaller farms fold up shop because it's just impossible. Kids, look at that lifestyle, aren't drawn to it, go to do something else, and they become specialized in something. So Johnny leaves the farm, becomes a lawyer. Sally leaves the farm, becomes a doctor, whatever the story is, right? And then meanwhile, the big corporations start buying up all of this land and doing what they do, in terms of industrially mining the soils and distributing stuff for the least amount of, cost. All fine, but you can see in this story, what we're gaining something, we're losing something. We're gaining cheap food, we're losing multi-diverse, very skilled people who are highly, highly resilient members of your community because they know how to do so much. So what you're talking about is a system of money that begins to reverse that process.
Right, exactly. And just in your example is excellent because it allows us to talk about fragility and anti-fragility, right? To use Nassim Taleb's concept. And so since we're talking about food, we all know in the recent COVID fallout, one of the things that happened was the handful of meat packing facilities. When one is shut down, suddenly the whole system is revealed as incredibly fragile, because this is what happens when you concentrate wealth and power and productive capacity in these small numbers of corporations and small numbers of facilities. And so, and I also want to say this is global. What you're talking about is equally true in Europe. Small farmers have been eradicated or squeezed out of existence in Europe as well by the same industrial scale of oil-based agriculture, right? And the average age of farmers in Japan is, I think it's over 75 now. I mean, it was over 70. Now I think it's pushing there's not going to be anybody left that knows how to grow rice, because that's the incentives, as you say, in the system. And so if we look at the fourth turning and where it's going to take us, I think it behooves us to start thinking about not just what we want, but how do we instantiate those goals, those values in a system that has the incentives that are going to reward, anti-fragility and actual productive, labor in behalf of the community in some way. And we disincentivize unearned privilege, rigging the system, et cetera, et cetera. So, and of course, what you and I know, and the Peak Prosperity audience knows, is all of the money that everyone's chasing so blindly is all going to go away one way or the other, right? And so we're going to have to start thinking about a form of money that we control, or that's not controlled at the top of a corrupt, self-serving hierarchy. So, and people look at Bitcoin, and the problem with Bitcoin is it's not earned by labor, it's earned by computer time, right? Basically electricity. And so that's a good model for how cryptocurrencies, that's one model, but I'm saying you don't need that. You don't need to mine a cryptocurrency. You can create a cryptocurrency that's based on labor. And just because nobody's done it doesn't mean it's not possible.
So help me understand how it works. So let's imagine somebody comes over and they're gonna tend to my cows for a day. They do a great job at it. How do they get paid?
Right. So the way that I've envisioned the system is there has to be a group. The group is actually the one that organizes the work, because a single individual isn't going to be able to do the work, and it's not going to be that one individual needs to be part of a group, because the group can organize larger work, and it can also have an organization that's democratic, right? Because we've got to be able to say, well, who gets to decide what labor is valued and which one isn't, right? And the software can manage some of that, but you need to start a group. So the way that my system is envisioned is the person that wants to help you with your livestock says, you know what, there's a shortage of people that know how to work with livestock in this community. So I'm going to start a group of people who are going to take care of livestock in the community, as needed, right? We don't necessarily own any, but we're going to help other people take care of theirs, that kind of thing. So then they'll follow the software, which has like step-by-step things. Okay, it's a democracy, so we elect a leader for a year and so on and so forth. And then we start organizing the work. And then you have to track the work. And then when you're done with your week, then you have to fill out the software and say, I performed these jobs at these places. And here's photos from my smartphone, which, by the way, you can have a $15 smartphone, right? You don't need a $400 one. I mean, there's really cheap models in India and China. So you upload some information that verifies you did the work, and then you look in your account and, hey, you got paid. Now you can start spending that, and every community has its own kind of like mini Amazon, in the sense that everybody's goods and services that they're willing to trade is on this is on the network. So you can buy and sell stuff with your new earned money. That's how I envision it, because with the groups, then groups can combine and they can do a lot more work. Groups can stay small. I mean, it's infinitely flexible, depending on the needs of the community. And so I think, and if you've been in groups, and I've spent a lot of my life in groups, political groups, faith-based groups, companies, so on and so forth, social groups, education, nonprofits, you name it. Of course, there's always a little, friction, right? People are, oh, well, somebody's trying to, run the meeting and so on and so forth. But if you have that experience, it's not too hard to design a system that rotates leadership, for example, and that has a system of subcommittees, so the work actually gets done. And so I've designed a system that I think works based on my decades of experience in small groups. Yes, there's always going to be friction, but if you're working with purpose and meaning, you set all that stuff aside, because you're going, wow, I'm contributing to something important, and that's such an amazing feeling. And it's such a hit or miss thing in the system we have now. Very few people get to experience that. And that just shows how inhumane our system is.
Well said. I maybe should have asked this question earlier, but based on all your research and all your writing and thoughtfulness, what's your sense of the direction of things at this point? And are we facing a lot more hard times? I mean, you mentioned something, sort of, you threw it out there. We all know our money system's going away. I can't imagine that without being just enormously disruptive, if not destructive, to most people's lives, right? That's a really painful thing when your money system fails. Are you saying that you're pretty sure our money system's going to fail?
Yeah, I think if we look at history and we look at systems, right? And of course, you're a systems guy. And people work in systems, they exist in systems, but they don't necessarily understand that they all have processes, and the processes generate output. And some systems, can only generate a certain kind of output. So if that system is wired the way it is, you're only going to get one kind of output. And so if you want a different kind of output, you're going to have to change the system. So if we look at history, and I like to look at the Roman Empire because it's so well documented. That's the difference between, like, say, the Mayan Empire or the Tang Dynasty. We have some records, of course, from China, but the Roman Empire is remarkably well documented. We have papyrus that was in Egypt, right, where it shows the exact accounts of and the crew members of ships going to trade with southern India and this kind of stuff. So we have a lot of detail. Well, their money collapsed over time, right? They did the same thing that we're doing, which is, let's inflate our money because we need more of it. So let's debase the silver coin with, lead and other stuff. And then, oh, that worked. So let's just do that some more. And then pretty soon there's virtually no silver in it at all. And so that undermines the entire system, right? Because then people don't have, they cannot trust that the money is going to have the value a year from now that it does in the present. And so, and Rome was also struck by pandemic. It was struck by invasions and people wanting their own resources back from the empire. And so, and political infighting, that the elites in Rome were more interested in fighting each other than in dealing with the the enemies, the barbarians, which, by the way, they weren't really barbarians. They just happened to be Germanic people that were in the empire, but there was a built-in bias against them. And so by the end of the empire, all these fragilities took the system down. That's how I would put it. That the empire had once been anti-fragile, and all those sources of anti-fragility eroded, unraveled, or were corrupted. And so then what was left was only a fragile shell. And I think that describes the US economy, political system, and social system to a T. It's like a fragile, hollow shell, and it's not going to take much for it to implode. And since all these things are connected, you could have a political crisis that takes down the money supply, because, if there's political pressure to give us all $1 million a month, well, then that's a quick way to destroy your money supply right there.
So whenever in business you're facing a problem or a predicament like this, you only have two choices: do something, do nothing. And so for a lot of people, I think it's sort of the do nothing, might as well wait, see what's happening. What you're talking about in your new book is that it's time to start thinking about, for the people who are interested in the do something side of things, it's never too early to start thinking about stuff. And by the way, let me be very clear, Charles. No matter how badly it collapses, let's imagine it collapses really bad. Money system just total wipeout, supply chains break down, death and destruction, all of that. Nobody's thought anything through. Eventually, we're going to see that an economy and a money system emerges again, because that's how humans are. That every tribe, every society you look at has somehow found an expression for money, some way to store wealth, some way to do that, whether it was giant stones with circles in it, or cowrie shells, or hides of animals, or it was silver, or it was gold, or pieces of paper. It always seems to happen, right? So I like the idea, though, that you're saying, well, let's talk about this. What would we want? And I can give you a lot of not this in my own story. This whole COVID thing, really, I have to confess, as jaded as I am or was, I was nowhere near jaded enough for this particular story when I saw our health officials not recommending simple, cheap, effective things because of money, because they wanted pharma companies to be able to sell more of their latest fancy stuff, right? That level, that disconnection from the basic humanity, that's not a world I have any interest in preserving. I don't want to tweak it. I have no interest in figuring out how to make it slightly better. I'm a burn it down kind of guy for a lot of that stuff. It's unfixable. So I think there's enough people listening to this, though, who also aren't that way. I actually think we've been co-opted by a very small, select group of people who are sociopathic, if not psychopathic. Full definition, right? In the DSM. But for people who are interested in doing something and are caring and have some compassion and want to begin figuring this stuff out, what I hear you saying is it's time to start doing the hard work, right? It's not too early to begin lifting this, because two outcomes: we do nothing and the economy crashes and all that, and the recovery from that could be kind of, when the Romans left Europe, it was like 400 years. People were like, we don't know how to make a heated bathhouse. That was really cool, but we kind of lost the technology. It's gone, for a long time. But if we had something in place and we'd thought about it and we'd started working in small groups and gone through that reconnection process and that friction that always happens as people try and come to a shared understanding of something, that if we can do that work now, we'll be in such better shape to at least we're not starting from nothing when the rebuilding comes. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. That's the main point of my book is, okay, look if you've got a better system and you've sketched it out in greater detail than mine, hey, put it out there. We all need to start looking at some alternatives. And so the basic model, the infrastructure that I'm talking about is basically like a Linux or a Mozilla. In other words, you look at these things that basically started with a very small group of people started coding something, and then other people got interested and they started contributing. And it wasn't for let's become billionaires. And it's all like, we assume, oh, well, if no one will do any work unless they're going to be a billionaire. And it's all like, well, actually, humans are wired to contribute and want to belong to something greater than ourselves, right? And to earn dignity by sacrificing with another group that's got a purpose. And so these systems like Linux show that you actually can design a software system which is global and robust with just people contributing to an open source system. So again, I think a lot of people are going to look at my ideas and go, well, that's just airy-fairy kind of stuff. And it's all like, well, no, actually, cryptocurrencies do exist. And actually, if you know, the more you know about cryptocurrencies, and I'm not an expert, you realize there's a bunch of different platforms that have nothing to do with mining cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. There's a lot of other models out there, and they already exist. And there's a lot of open source systems, which are global, like Linux and Mozilla, that are not owned by a corporation, aren't run by a sociopath at the top. Here's talking to you, Warren, Bill, Jeff. And so it's entirely feasible. And so, and yet it's beyond what any one of us can do. And so it's going to take something like where a group of people or some idealistic person who's now guilty about the hundreds of millions they've skimmed off the system to say, well, I'm going to put like some kind of tiny amount of money, like 10 million bucks behind this idea, see where it goes. And so I don't know how or what that's going to work. It could be a faith-based organization goes, yeah, you know what? These are the principles of our religion. So let's see if we can help this idea get going, you know? I don't know how that's going to work, but somebody somewhere will pick up the threads, and then hopefully there'll be a political will that a revulsion against another corrupt, exploitive, parasitic hierarchy, and there'll be a political desire for a decentralized, anti-fragile system that can benefit everybody that's a participant, and not just a few at the top.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how do you think? How do you go about getting people to sort of engage with this sort of idea? I'm beating around the bush. You know, Charles, there's a lot of people out there who've gotten kind of used to not working hard. Maybe don't even know how to work or work hard because they haven't actually done it yet in their life. So I'm interested that you started, or there's at least a part of your book that says, here's who I am. And I'm sure when I read it, I'm going to say, oh my gosh, look at all the things you've done. You've probably sheetrocked a wall and put some wiring in and you know, built something and run a business and on and on and on, right? Which collectively gives you a framing that says it's hard work, but it's doable. Persistence and thoughtfulness can get you far. Are there enough people who understand those values and have that experience to pull this off? Do we have critical mass here?
Yeah, great question, Chris. And again, it goes to your point about incentives, right? What are the incentives in the system? So obviously, you know, humans are generally like, if we can use fewer calories and get more calories, we'll do that, right? So if there is still a government giving away free money and you can use the money to buy a bunch of stuff, then no one's going to join something like mine, right? Not no one, but fewer people will, right? Because there's some alternative. But when that system breaks down, just like the bread and circuses in Rome, and here again, perfect example, the wealth of the empire was squandered on circuses, right? These enormously expensive things with a lot of bloody action, and feeding hundreds of thousands of people, giving them free bread in the city of Rome, which had basically been shipped across the Mediterranean from North Africa. I mean, at enormous expense. I mean, entire fleets of ships had to be built and maintained in order to feed the 250,000 of people who got the free bread. So that system was super fragile, and so was the system supporting the whole Roman infrastructure. So when it breaks down, then what? Well, you no longer have an option of getting the free bread. There's no more free money. So now what do I do? Well, then you have a different, you know, set of choices. So my system is not going to really catch on until the free bread and circuses have gone away. At that point, then people will start making different decisions, and they'll say, well, gee, I really want to eat still. I still want shelter, and I can't get that on my own. So I'm going to have to make some other choice. And so then it's going to be, you know, joining the brigands, the thieves in the forest, or you can lay down and die, or you're going to have to join some other group. And in the post-Roman era, then in the Western Empire, then you could join a group of people serving a monastery, or something like that, or you could join a Germanic army. So there was always options, and it's just like, the question is, are you going to create one, or are you going to have to join one that's another, rapacious, parasitic hierarchy? Because of course, there's always going to be those around. There's always going to be somebody that's going to try to recruit slaves or serfs and to do work for them and skim the money. So what I'm saying is, if there's an alternative that's better, then people will eventually choose that. And I think what I really like about my idea is, because I've worked in a lot of different jobs, not everybody's super talented. There's a lot of people who have physical or mental disabilities, and yet there's always work for people. In other words, you can tend animals, you can kind of watch the kids, you can sweep the sidewalks. I mean, there's a lot of work that's actually useful that doesn't require the kind of insane drive and brilliance that we think of as, well, you have to have these characteristics to do something useful. It's like, no, there's a lot of most of the work that's performed on the planet is actually very simple. And so if we started paying people for doing that work that's useful, well, then they'd have money, and they might actually find that they like belonging and being needed.
Yeah. Warren Buffett had a great quote that he said, when he hires people, he's looking for three things. He's looking for energy, intelligence, and integrity. And he said, if they don't have the integrity, they'll kill you with the first two.
Yeah.
So this brings me to a comment I have about AI. So I'm of two minds, right? On the one hand, I don't like how it's been used, right? Because it's mostly been used to sort of hack people's, in the bad way, hack people's wiring to sell crap, right? I don't think that's a great use. The other mind that I hold on it, though, is that we've now created a world where there's 8 billion people, give or take, and it's too complex. It's too complex for ordinary human wiring to get through, right? We have AI now that can land a rocket on a barge in the ocean, right? There's no human pilot that can do that, right? So in an equivalent sense, AI could be that thing. If we're gonna pierce through, if technology is gonna come with us for the ride, we're gonna have to find a way to use the AI to help us manage things that we no longer can manage for ourselves, because we're too slow, we're too, irrational, whatever the story is. So that's a place where I could see AI coming forward, and it kind of full circles. Like, why did people behave? Why was people's behavior of higher integrity and more constrained a long time ago? Well, it's because they lived in a village of about 100 people, and you couldn't get away with anything because everybody was in everybody's business. AI is kind of that thing now, right? I think the anonymity of the sort of the citification, the anonymity that people had. Here's what all I know is that when people have anonymous personas on the internet, they act badly. So to the extent to which, the system now becomes, you create a system where people are no longer anonymous. And given that, though, and if everybody knows that's a fair system, everybody has to play by the same rules, then people want the next layer up that, which they want that meaning and purpose, right? And once they achieve that meaning and purpose, it builds on itself and it goes from there. But you can't have nothing at the base. That's what I'm trying, that's what I feel like our culture has for a lot of people. Nothing at the base. I work at Wendy's or McDonald's or Burger King, and there's just no meaning or purpose to this, and it feels unfair. And so therefore, you never make it to the next level on that story.
Right. You're so right about that, Chris, because we can call that upward mobility or social mobility, where ideally, every human being has a path to something better. Now, that could be a lot of different things depending on each person, right? And so does our system enable that? And we look at the people who rise to the top and we go, oh yeah, we live in a meritocracy. But actually, as you're kind of pointing out, the meritocracy window is narrowed to such a tiny hole now that even getting a PhD doesn't guarantee you some kind of secure, well-paying job, even in the sciences, right? I mean, so every ladder that people had and were told, oh, climb this ladder and you're going to have upward mobility, every ladder has been broken, you know, and so now it's like this almost impossible to get ahead. And also to get ahead as an individual, like, in other words, it's not just about making more money. It's like, how do I fulfill my potential or my talents or my interests? And so in our system, I call it, it's just hit or miss. Like, some people succeed in doing it, but the majority don't. And so what I was thinking is, well, why don't we have a system that more or less guarantees the opportunity, not the outcome, but it guarantees the opportunity. And so go back to your thing about AI, I think what we're talking about is, are we serving AI, or is AI serving us? And if AI is just serving us, then it would be used in something like my system, where, as you say, once it's controlled by corporate hierarchies or government hierarchies, then we're serving it, because it's just another tool of exploitation and predation. So will there be a change in the values of society after the complexity goes away? And I think people, as you say, people want fairness, but they don't know how to get it. And so they're enraged, right? They're frustrated, disgusted, enraged, and hence they want to just go break some windows, right? That's what we're in that stage now. So what I hope is, whether it's my idea or somebody else's idea, it's like, we need to have something that people can look at with hope, right? And say, well, actually, yeah, that system would work. That would work for me, and it would work for my community, and it would work for the world. Let's talk about doing that, you know? So, and I consider that very likely, actually, you know, if we can get it out there, you know?
Well, it's in Hacking Teleology, and so I would advise people to get that book. Charles, and be personal about this, how do I get my hands on it?
Okay, well, if you go to of2minds.com, I've assembled like an excerpt, a series of excerpts from the book, so you can read a pretty good chunk of the book for free, and then you can decide if it's of any interest to you. And then you have to order it through the company store, otherwise known as Amazon, because I can't get, nobody will publish my book except if the way that, I'll just give you a quick, most readers don't know this, but if you go to a small publisher, they're going to take most of the money, and then they're going to put your book on Amazon just like you would. Only you don't get any money, and you no longer own the rights to the book. So when they stop publishing it, you're out of luck. So anyways, I have my same reservations as everybody else about the company store. But at this point, that's the only way I can get my ideas out there, is through the company store. So you have to go to Amazon and buy it.
Amazon. All right. Well, that's where you find it. And of course, you get the excerpts at Of Two Minds. So check that out, everybody. Charles, thank you so much for writing the book. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm really actually personally very interested in it, because this could be a test bed here. You know, we're setting up a whole interesting thing is going on here on the homestead, you know. So we have a community developing. It feels really good. We've got a bunch of people. Last night was a fascinating night because we were presenting a bunch of ideas to the town planning board, and they loved all our ideas. It was a big love fest. But afterwards, it just felt really good, because we had 12 people who are now assembled around this idea. So it's my brain is already turning to, we already have a community. What's the container for it? What are the rules? How are we setting this up? You know, what behaviors do we want? Like, I'm just already there. So maybe we could find a way to implement some of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think just in closing, I think all my ideas to take what you and Evie and your colleagues are doing and rationalize it, like make it a set of rules that somebody could log into something and create a group just like yours, at least the infrastructure of it, and the rules that would keep it going in a positive direction. And they could get into that without having to reinvent it. And so that, I think, would be hugely powerful. And so you might be able to do that. Just a simple kind of web-based thing where anybody could start a group similar to yours. Now, it may not be as effective, you know, or in the same field or whatever, but just to have that model, you know, and a step-by-step thing would be huge. So that's basically my idea at the smallest level. And then you can say, well, gee, Chris, if you had this model and somebody in the Congo or South Korea could log in and create the same kind of group, that would be pretty neat, especially if there was some way they could connect and share ideas.
Well, indeed. So, well, that's what the next year is going to be about, is really starting to gel things like this. So, anyway, we'll stay in touch around that. Thank you so much for your time today. And
thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure to talk about my work, but I hope it's not so much my work. It's like ideas that we can all go beyond, you know, at least it's a starting point.
I heard you loud and clear. It's time to kick off the conversation. You've kicked it off, so consider it started. And I'm like you. You might have the best idea out there, and that'll be great. And if there's a different, better one that comes along, that'll be great. I think this is the stage of history where we're just going to have to try. I'm a rapid prototype, iterative kind of guy, right? So
yeah.
So, you know, there's so much more value in getting things started and kicked off and at least moving than there is in analysis paralysis and all that other stuff. So we got to start trying some of this stuff. It's kind of 11 and a half hour.
Yeah. Okay, Chris. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. The pleasure's been mine.